All right, good afternoon, everybody. All protocols observed. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So, the big picture is that we have two crises going on, right? First, we have the climate crisis that we're all speaking about, and then we also have the biodiversity crisis going on. So, human beings have killed 83% of mammals, vertebrates, and plants on Earth, okay? At 83%. It's gone already. At present, we have 1 billion species endangered. And it is this very same capital, natural capital, the biosphere in which we are living, which is also necessary for the first crisis, the climate crisis, that is more visible and has become more tangible for everybody now. But we have a gap. We have a gap of scale, because even though we have billions available and invested everywhere, it is still far from sufficient. That's one gap. The second gap that we have is that there are already billions and millions available, but they need to find the right projects at the right scale. So the right people with the right projects. And more of. So the question is, how can we do that? And so that is what I want to focus on. And by way of context, it is also helpful to remember that in this particular graph, you're seeing 100,000 years. The blue graph shows 90,000 years within these 100,000 years, and human beings existed 2 graphs before that, right? So 300,000 years. So for 290,000 years, temperature varied a lot, like the blue line indicates, okay? It's only in the last 10 years, fluke of the universe created a remarkable stability, plus minus 1 degree, right? And it is only within these last 10,000 years that everything that we sort of can think of in terms of agriculture, the basic civilizations, came about in this last period. And what we're doing right now is we're going out of those boundaries, right? So we are now, it is now 50% chance that within the next 3 years, by 2025, the world will have an average temperature of 1.5 degrees temporarily. It will come down probably, but we are beyond the limits, beyond the boundary in many dimensions. In a couple of weeks, we have COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. This graph is from last year or after the last year summit. And all the commitments from the governments that they're making give us 2.4 degrees, right? So their best intentions, 2.4, right? What they actually do is gives us closer to 2.9 degrees, okay? Now, it was the Caribbean that led the call for 1.5 degrees in Paris in 2015, okay? Because at 1.5 degrees, we already, just as an example, we already lose like 70% of corals. At 2 degrees, there is no coral left in the world, okay? The currents in the seas will change. I mean, it's going to be absolutely drastic. So currently, we are nowhere close to on target, okay? So that means that everybody who has an idea needs to be supported, needs to find the right funding, and everybody else needs to start to change what they do and how they do it, because they are part of the solution. And if they're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. So there is this investment gap. Let's illustrate it just looking at nature-based solution paths and just looking at half of the story. So let's look at only climate change mitigation. If we consider all options on the table for climate change mitigation, then 37% of all solutions are nature-based solutions, okay? And right now, if you look at the actual financing of mitigation plans, only 2% go into nature-based solutions. That means that we have a huge gap missing of potentials, just as were illustrated just now. But we just need to scale it up dramatically. And it is cheaper, it is better, it is On all counts, it's better. But what is the missing story and what is the thing that will get us further? Before we come there, let me give you one more statistic. In 2020, this report came out from Professor Dasgupta from Cambridge University. Importantly, it was commissioned by the UK Treasury. Okay, so not Environment Department, not anywhere else, Treasury, Finance. We want to know the economics of biodiversity. And I was an environmental economist, but I can't claim it again. But so I read it with great interest. And the one statistic that sort of is shocking beyond belief is that in 20 years, we have managed to reduce the natural capita per person on the planet by 40%. Okay? So the way it works is that we have this nature out there, all the thing that is green, and or not necessarily green, all of nature as a functioning system is producing benefits. That's the stock. And we need to maintain that stock, just like we have a stock of capital in a trust fund. We need that money because there's flow of benefits that comes from it, right? So the interest rates or returns in money, in this case, it is goods and services that the minister mentioned this morning, calculated on a number of dimensions. So at the moment, we are reducing that stock of capital at a rate which is obviously unsustainable, right? Because we're not making the progress for ourselves nor for the future. So it is absolutely very important. But one of the second important thing to note here is that not only are we not running fast enough in the right direction, many governments are actively running in the wrong direction, right? They are supporting and financing the destruction of nature and pollution, right? To staggering scales, right? Including the oil and gas industry, prime example, right? With all the subsidies and all the other things that are going with it. So it is absolutely fundamental that we need the private sector, all organizations need to put a hand on deck, and at the same time, we need to ask of all governments and anybody who's invited to the ministry's stakeholder consultation. I will give you two things to lobby for, right? Coming up next. So therefore the situation is well understood. We need to invest more. We already have a lot of money that is not finding the right target, but we need a lot more of it. Okay? So a number of times, a number of speakers spoke about this, about the increase in the variety of debt instruments. Last year when I looked, I didn't check, I should have checked maybe now, but I didn't. But last year, for the Latin American and the Caribbean, the IDB's platform on green bonds shows that it's $21 billion within the region invested in green bonds only. So just one type, right? Within CARICOM, it is 18 million, right? So I think there was one more bond issue by the same organization in Barbados. So maybe it's, I don't know, 13 now or something. But it is minuscule. And in the next 8 years, it is expected, as everybody said, it has to go up manifold. But even that will not be kind of sufficient, but it will be necessary. So what are the keys to approaching these things? And I think we can learn from Vertiver and from Close the Loop and the other persons that we heard here, is it has to be an integrated approach. So we are trying to save nature because we are so destructive about it. And at the moment, so just to the picture is, so we know, everybody I think knows that by 2050 we want to be climate neutral, right? That is not the end target, that is just stop making it worse, right? And then we have to go up again. Just like we did with ozone layer, we stopped it, and now we are on the reverse trend. So that is the scale. But what is the target for nature? So at the moment, as I say, we are in a kamikaze flight down the target is to stop nature loss and to become nature positive by 2030, okay? So everybody thinks about Sharm el-Sheikh next week, the week after. There's another one. When everybody's watching football, some of us will be in Montreal dealing with trying to stop nature loss, become nature positive by 2030 at COP15, which the minister mentioned as well. Okay, point is that the examples that we heard, it became really successful once you were able to engage communities, families, livelihoods. So people and nature go together. And it can only be an integrated solution that can lead to anything, right? Any single focus will not be good enough. These are your two lobbying points, right? First, recommend that we should adopt Target 15. It needs to be mandatory for every single organization to understand and to disclose its dependencies and its impact on nature, okay? That's number one. It's not optional. It's like saying, you know, when you contact anybody, you want to know, are these people, do they have enough money? Can they survive? Do they have a bank account? The same thing has to be for nature. Are they destructors of nature or are they okay? The second thing is governments need to stop the funding of the destruction and use this money to invest it now into nature positive stuff. Okay? And that starts with procurement, with public infrastructure, all the things that they do. Stop making bad, start making good. Okay? So that's the two things that. Now, let me talk just a little bit about ESG. To understand ESG, you have to think about these two reports, right? The first one in 2004, which was Who Cares Wins. This was the very first time that the words were strung together. And it was like not a gimmick, but it was like a strategic ploy to make it memorable, to make it clear. And the target was, we would like institutional investors to start financing development activities. So, and they can only finance it if the potential investees are disclosing this information. I mean, what are you going to invest in if you don't know? So in order to be able to invest, I need to know what are you doing in the environmental, social, and governance domains. This has taken up. This year, Alex Edmonds of the London Business School wrote a paper called The End of ESG. And he's, you know, it's tongue-in-cheek. And it is the same title like the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, Richard Taylor. On behavioral economics, he had a paper called The End of Behavioral Economics. Of course, it's not the end. People are going to use it, right? But his point was, and Alex's point now, is that it is not a niche thing. It is not like a department. It's not anybody. Everybody has to do it. It's normal. It's mainstream. It is a real risk. If it's a real risk, you have to take it into account. That's it. So it is nothing very special. And we need to, because it is so important. Okay, so that is the point. Now, the way you know whether something is ESG or CSR, so of course everybody wants to have a responsible organization. That's nothing wrong with that. And you know, people should continue to invest in communities and give back and sponsor things. Please continue. And at the same time, your main business should not be destroying value, right? So the main difference is that ESG topic is not asking how many CSR projects you have. It's asking, tell me about your core business. And if your annual report is reporting only financial results, you're in CSR. You didn't tell me what is going on with the capitals, nature, and social, and human. Minimum, right? So the point is that when you take this approach, and this is the bridge that ESG was trying to make, is these things have real potential impacts. It's not trying to pull things out of your hair and to say, what can I do to be sexy? No, what are the real risks, the real opportunities? Focus on them, report it, do more of it, right? So the good thing is that the world kind of has agreed, right? So overall, we are now in an era of consolidation, right? So in 2 years' time, at the end of this year, the international ISP, the National Sustainability Standards Board, which is part of IFRS, is going to release 2 standards. and they're going to be starting to be applied from next year to report the year after, right? Which means that now your main financial accounts need to include not only financial, but also environmental and social and governance dimensions, okay? So, and while it will first apply to larger organizations, the medium and small ones will need to do it as well, because the large ones will ask the small ones, well, what about, I'm buying from you, what is your thing, right? So everybody kind of will have to start to do these things very soon. Now, the point is that you know that you're doing ESG or that you're doing something substantive if there are 4 things that you have done 4 things. Have you assessed your dependence and your impact on the natural, the social, and the human capital, right? Including financial. You will do that anyway, right? We don't have to even mention that. You will do it. So, but have you assessed this? The second thing is, have you committed to a science-based target of saying what is reasonable and fair in your circumstance and disclosed it? Have you done anything to transform the situation? What is going to change as a result of what you're doing? We know the finance, you want to keep the line going up. Well, okay, all these other areas. Is it going up? Is it going down? What is actually happening? So to report on these 3 dimensions and disclose throughout. And this topic is not, it's not in a PDF document, right? It's not an Excel sheet. If you use Excel to do this, you know you're wrong, right? Because you're dealing with multiple sites, and just like in finance, it may not be clear to people, but 2 years from now, all these topics will be audited, right? So the reason why all the big 4 have each invested $1 billion in buying companies and hiring people is because there is huge demand and business for auditing this stuff, right? So, but before you audit it, you need to start doing it. Okay, so there is that part. Okay, what can you practically do? The first thing is know that your target is, I need to assess, I need to commit, and I need to transform, right? Now, how do I get there? Because the aim is not to just do things, right? The aim is to be as systematic as Vashti has determined, has illustrated it for a smaller organization. But the large ones need to do exactly the same, just at bigger scale. You have to be very rigorous in working with your business models in order to see what benefits am I producing for whom and what impacts do these things have, right? So the big change in governance is that until now, we could simply ignore 2 things. We could ignore what is the effect of what we're doing. It's okay, they're buying it, that's what it is, right? So ignore the consequence and ignore the impact of the resources that you're using. So those things now are not irrelevant anymore, right? ESG is focusing on the resource base, and the purpose is focusing on the impact. Okay? So, but the good thing is that we are in an era of consolidation where the techniques, the processes, the measures, everything is being standardized. Yeah, so that is why we have these playbooks, right? So that you can actually develop your own play. How are we going to do stuff? Because it is important. So overall, we can only succeed if we create this positive feedback loop. So this is taken, for example, from a coalition, Nature for Business, to go to COP15, and basically, just like in COP in Paris, it was business that created sort of that leverage and that pressure to say, we want regulation. We do not lobby for less regulation, right? The problem is that too many people are getting away with murder, and it is only if we have a common playing field that we can create competition. So that is why we need business, policy, both of them to be ambitious and to create a virtual loop.